and welcome to Good Grief, the podcast dedicated to demystifying and destigmatizing grief with compassion and humor. I'm Nikki. I'm an end-of-life doula and a grief coach in Columbus, Ohio. And today I have my first guest episode of Season 5. I am super excited. I had such a great conversation with Kevin O'Connor, the author of 2 Floors Above Grief. I won't take too much of your time here because I want you to enjoy this episode, but I would not be doing my due diligence if I didn't remind you that I have a Patreon. If you go over to patreon.com/NikkiTheDeathDoula, for as little as $1 a month, you can support me in providing pro bono work and giving back to the community where I can. You can also get early access to this podcast and other bonus content throughout the week. But that's not why you're here. You're here to listen to this interview, and I will get right into it. Before we jump in, I just wanted to put a little caveat with the video and everything, and also kind of apologize. I was having a lot of technical issues with my computer during the recording. I went back and re-listened and rewatched it, and everything seemed to come out okay, but I was a little off my game because weird things kept happening while we were talking, so I was very ill-focused. So Kevin, I apologize to you for being a little scattered during our conversation. And if you look at the video, I'm looking all around because my computer was going a little haywire, but everything came out okay and we're good. So please enjoy this episode. I have his information in the show notes with his website, his book information. Please go and sign up for his newsletter. His newsletter is filled with so many great resources, so much cool stuff. So definitely check that out. And without further ado, here's my conversation with Kevin O'Connor. Thank you so much, everybody, for tuning in again this week. I am so excited for my guest. I'm excited for you to hear all about Kevin O'Connor. Kevin and I met not too long ago. We chatted for a bit, and I said, dude, I need to have you on my show because I love your story. So, Kevin, why don't you just take a second, tell everybody about you, your place in the world, your book, and all the things.
Okay, let's see. My place in the world right now, I have been living in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, since 2007. But prior to that, I lived mostly in the Midwest outside of Chicago. And I grew up in a town called Elgin, Illinois. Elgin is northwest of Chicago, about 30 miles. And I grew up, in a rather unique setting. I grew up in an apartment above a funeral home. And I was born in 1950, and that's the house I was brought home to and stayed there through college. And with my 2 brothers, my mom and my dad. Oh, and I'll show you a cover of that. And I wrote a book about this.
Yes.
So, and the cover is right here. And so if you see from the cover, there's this is the house that I talked about. This over here I get reversed here. That was my bedroom window.
Oh, wow.
The one thing about this old house built in the 1880s, my uncle and my dad, they had started a business 10 years prior in 1930 in Elgin, and it was growing, and they needed to expand, and this house was available. It was falling into disrepair. Wasn't that old by today's standards. It was, at that time, it was only 50 years old, but it had had a lot of ravages from the economic times and the depression and those kind of things, and had been taken care of. So my uncle was able to get the house with some negotiations, and they took the first floor and they created spaces for the funeral home there, the basement with all the support services that they need. The second floor was a collection of bedrooms that was turned into an apartment for my aunt and uncle and their 3 daughters. The top floor was actually a ballroom, and the ballroom had 2 stages in it. So when this was a single family home and people would entertain, their guests would come up to the ballroom and there'd be orchestras there and things like that. So my bedroom, I pointed out where my bedroom was, my bedroom there,
Right there.
was had a stage in it. So when I came home in 1950, my bassinet or whatever was put right next to the stage. And as I grew and my beds changed, it wasn't until I was about 8 years old that my parents decided we needed more space in the apartment, and they took both stages out. But so the first 8 years of my life, I was right next to a stage, and played on the stage and underneath the stage, and that was the sort of part
Yeah,
of our
as a
play.
theater kid, that is like my
Yeah,
little dream. I would have
oh,
loved
that's right.
to.
Me too. I'm going to a theater class tonight.
Oh,
So 75 years later, I'll be 75 next week. I'm still doing theater stuff, and I really think that it has to do with
yeah,
sleeping next to a stage for the first
yeah,
8 years of my life. Yeah,
absolutely.
yeah. But intertwined with all this was the idea of living amidst a funeral home, and tying a bit into your work. Um, and the whole concept of death and dying and grief. I was immersed in that from the time like I said, I was a baby. So I really never knew anything different, and it was really more or less normalized for me just because it was my living environment. And that's just a little bit of the background that can get us into further discussion, but that's what connects me with you and other people in the death and dying industry, the
Yeah.
death care industry, the areas of grief. So that's how I ended up in this venue. So the book was published about 3 years ago, and just now I've been working on getting the book out there into the world and talking to people about it. So that's what brings me to you today.
Yeah, that's awesome. So first of all, again, as growing up a theater kid, I would have loved to have a stage in my room. And being a death doula, I would love to live above a funeral home. I'd be all about
Okay.
that. Now, and it's interesting because you mentioned that, you grew up that way. So
Mhm.
it was not stigmatized to you at all. And I can imagine, yeah, if I were to think back to 8-year-old Nikki and my parents said, you're going to move into a funeral home, I would have been like, ew, gross. That's so horrifying.
Uh-huh.
But,
Uh-huh.
you grew up that way. So it never once even occurred to you that it was horrifying.
No,
Did any of your friends ever like kind of give you grief or tease you or anything about that?
they probably did, I read other books there are other books on the marketplace about people who grew up in funeral homes, and some of those the experiences they relate are the teasing and the things. I have little to no memory of that. So I guess in that case, it probably didn't
Yeah,
happen.
you were lucky. You had good friends.
Yeah, and I think maybe that goes back to because the environment was normalized.
Mhm.
My mom and dad and my aunt and uncle always they had friends over and company and celebrations in the apartments. And their daughters were a little, well, 14 and 20 years older than me. So they had preceded me in all the schools I went to in the neighborhoods and things like that. So they sort of laid the groundwork as well. And everybody in town, on that part of town, and in our circles around our schools and churches, they knew that we were the O'Connor kids and we lived in a funeral home. So when I got into school and started making friends and inviting people over to play, having sleepovers, um, I don't remember any resistance. I remember probably more curiosity,
Mhm.
and probably to a point giving these friends a tour of what was around.
Oh,
But
yeah.
the regular friends, the kids that came over more often, they just came up the back stairs to our apartments. They weren't walking through the funeral home or anything like
Sure.
that. So it was just going up. It'd be like going to anybody's apartment that was on a second or third floor. So yeah, go back to your question. I don't remember getting teased or anything about it, or thinking I'm not going to hang out. We're not going to hang out with him because he lives in a funeral home, and
Oh,
nothing
that's
like that.
awesome. Well, that's good though.
Yeah.
I'm glad to hear
Yeah.
that. I'm glad you didn't get teased too much.
No, no. Again, I didn't. I really haven't even thought about that until reading other books and then being on a number of podcasts lately where
Yeah.
that question comes up and think, oh boy, I don't know if I was lucky or if it was just a tribute to my parents,
Yeah.
if with their social ability and the way they didn't keep themselves out of social circles or anything like that, just because they thought there was a stigma or a label on their business or their profession. So I
Yeah.
think that, yeah.
So, well, I want to talk about that briefly. You mentioned credit to your parents a little bit. So, to me, or to most people who don't grow up living above a funeral home,
Mhm.
that seems not the norm, not totally normal, but to you it was. But did your parents ever address that with you? Did they ever, like, at what age did you start being cognizant of the fact of what was going on downstairs? And how did they talk about that with you?
Well, great question. I don't remember any long discussions about it.
Okay.
I think, from the time I say this in the book a little bit, one of my earliest memories, and very vague at that time, was just if my dad had work to do down in the funeral home, whether it was setting up chairs or working in the office or arranging flowers. And he was also, when we were also under his care, he would just, when I say we, my younger brother and I, he would just take us with him and we would, play on the floor, or he might bring some toys for us to play as he's working.
Mm-hmm.
And it was just seeing him in his element, I guess, or observing him, but I didn't think much other of it. Um, at the, one thing about the family, and this is talked about in the book too, and I got used to it. I didn't know any different. We could be sitting down to dinner, and the phone would ring, and Dad would leave,
Yeah.
or we could have things planned to go to an outing, or he would be coming to an event at our school, and he would get called on the phone for either a death call, somebody died, or an ambulance call, which he also had a service, and he would have to leave right away.
Yeah.
So that was just, and then oftentimes, if it was an event at school, if he couldn't get there right away, he might show up a little later.
Mm-hmm.
Whatever, but he tended to the business first as he had to, and that was just part of our life as a family was, I guess you'd call them interruptions.
Yeah.
But I don't remember getting, oh darn, or damn, it was just,
Yeah.
this is what was.
Just what it was.
And
Wow.
this is what it was. And I guess it goes back to that normalization thing that,
Mhm.
and then the other thing, feeding off your question, they didn't talk a whole lot about the clients, the families. They
Okay.
were very, and I realized this more as an adult than I did as a kid, the importance of discretion and the importance of
Yeah.
trust.
Yeah.
And when a family would come to my dad and my uncle to take care of them, um, they didn't, those families didn't want to think that they were being discussed at the
Sure.
family dinner table,
Yeah, absolutely.
or that, and it wasn't until when I became preteen, 10, 12, teenager, then I might be visibly involved in the funeral home during the service, like opening the door or
Yeah.
helping or just answering the telephone when I could, or just being aware. But prior to that, if there were a wake or a funeral going on, we didn't venture downstairs. There were other ways to get in and out of the house, so we did that while my dad was busy with the business. So there weren't, back to your question, there weren't long involved discussions. I think that
Sure.
goes back to the normalizing process
Yeah.
until it was, I guess the other way I became aware of it more so was when probably my first awareness that I remember was when I was 5 and my 16-year-old cousin, first cousin, she died in a car crash.
Oh.
So, I mean, and the services were at our house.
Hmm.
So the idea of our family during the wake and our family going up and down the stairs to get a snack or a coffee or just to get out of the atmosphere for a while. They come upstairs. And that was probably the first awareness that I had because I knew this cousin.
Hmm.
And that was what I would recall be my first relationship with death and what it meant. And
Yeah.
probably there were conversations that oh, what we were doing and what was happening, or I was able to pick up on that just by being assimilated into the whole atmosphere.
Yeah.
But and maybe that was a long discussion at the time, or more of a detailed discussion about what we were doing and however they would explain that to a 5-year-old. Um, but I don't remember being not understanding.
Yeah.
So um, and then if it was, if somebody, if the client downstairs did happen to be a friend of the family or, then I would become more of aware of it because if it was the parent of a classmate or a grandparent of a classmate, well, then I'd be more aware of
Yeah.
how it was tying in. So that
Yeah.
was that part of the difference there.
Yeah. So I would assume that most like close family and close friends probably came to you, your family for
Mhm.
services. Yeah.
Yeah, there were other establishments, funeral
Yeah.
home establishments in town. And our family would come to ours probably. We didn't have a lot. Oh, we had some. Yeah, my mom grew up in the town, so there was quite a few, of her family that would come. In fact, when the funeral home first started, the way my mom and dad met in the 1930s was my mom's one grandparent died in. They both died in the 30s and 1930s. And those services were at the funeral home in the early years of the business. So
Yeah.
mom, as a teenager, would be there to attend the services for her grandparents who died a couple of years apart. But then also mom and dad. My dad was a teenager then, so the two of them were going to the same high school. So he was helping out in the business, but also she had this exposure to his family and what he did when she was there for her own family. So those kind of things started early on in their relationship. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So your dad and your uncle owned and operated this funeral establishment. Did they turn it over to you? Like, did you end up stepping into their shoes, so to speak, and running it at all?
No, it was that's all it's in the book. I spent some time
Okay.
writing about that, but I can explain it for sure. Dad and Uncle Lawrence were both. I often attribute it. One of the things I attribute not pursuing it is because they wanted us to determine what our own interests were.
Okay.
It was never the business for me anyway. I'm pretty sure my brothers would agree. Um, for me, this business was never held up as a carrot or something. Hey, we built this up. We expect you to do this. We're showing you how to do this work because we want you to do it. That message was never there.
Okay.
It was more you're your own person. You have your interest, and as we got into teenage years and choosing careers or making decisions, um, that wasn't on the plate. And it didn't have to be the
Yeah.
plate. It was never. Let's put it this way: it was never not on the plate.
Right.
If we had expressed if I had, I'll just speak for myself. If I had expressed an interest, it's sure they would have taken me under a wider wing and been able to intern and apprentice me in ways more than what I was doing just by living and working in the environment. But I pursued myself. I decided to pursue education. So I became a teacher and a school principal, and that's what I did with myself and my career. So
Awesome. So
yeah.
then what happened to the funeral home? Is it still running?
Yeah. Well, in 1984, by 1984, my uncle, who was a few years older than my dad, my in 1984, my dad was 71. He died that year of cancer.
Okay.
So, and my uncle had pretty much, the roles had changed. He had pretty much absent. He was living in the house still,
Okay.
in his apartment, but he wasn't as active in the business. So, the, um, the business was sold, just prior to my dad's death. And they still retain the name.
Oh, okay.
And then that gentleman owned it for a while, and then it changed hands one, two, three more times, I think.
Wow.
And but then it's continues to be a funeral home.
Mhm.
O'Connor is still in front of the sign. It still says now that the gentleman who's owned it for more than 20 years, his name is Leeds. And so now it says Leeds O'Connor,
Okay.
and he rents it out of the same house. But since 1984, there has never been any kind of involvement from our family, from a business standpoint. We'll go there when there's a family or a wake that we want to attend,
Yeah.
but there's never been any kind of attachment. So actually, is that my uncle started the business in 1930. So in 5 years, the business will be 100 years old.
Oh my gosh,
So,
yeah.
yeah.
Wow. That's
Mhm.
amazing.
Yeah, yeah,
Oh,
yeah. So
so
I mean, it's and they starting this business, and they came to the town as newbies. They'd been raised in Indiana, and they learned of this opportunity to get a place and open a funeral home in this town of Elgin. And my uncle came as a 20-something and fresh out of mortuary school, and brought my dad and his sister, his aunt, they were teenagers, brought them along because he was then gonna help raise them.
mhm.
So that's how my dad got involved in the business. Like me, it
Yeah,
was his home.
yeah,
And so then he did continue and did decide to go to mortuary school and work with his brother in the business.
sure.
So, yeah,
So I have to ask the question, and I'm guaranteed you get asked this all the time, but my
yeah.
one of my favorite TV shows of all time was Six Feet Under.
Oh, of course.
So
Yeah.
what I'm curious your thoughts on that show, like how obviously it was a television show, things were dramatized way more than they would be in real life, but the ins and outs of life as a family-owned funeral home, like did that seem to ring a little true or were they way off base?
Well, there's a couple correlations.
Okay.
One of the, if when you follow books on Amazon, people put reviews in, and one of the reviewers wrote, "Hey, this is the real 6 Feet Under family,"
Oh,
and
I love
so I took that as a compliment.
that.
I wouldn't fashion, of course, like you said, it was fiction, it was dramatized, and
Yeah.
uh, emphasized some of the various aspects of the family's personalities.
Yeah.
Um, I probably wouldn't be able to write a story. Our personalities probably weren't quite as, I'm looking for the right word,
Right.
individualized or quirky.
Yeah.
One interesting connection, though, when you read, you followed the show,
Hmm.
and when the mom,
Hmm.
the name gonna come to
Ruth.
me. Ruth, thank you. Well, when they do the whole thing about when she died, and they may have referenced this at other points in the series, but when you see her tombstone, and when they announce how she's going to die, actually she died in the show. She died in 2025 when
Yeah.
they projected,
Oh, that's right.
and her maiden name was O'Connor.
Yeah. I'm gonna
So
have
when
to
you
go back
look,
and rewatch that part now.
yeah, so when you see it on the tombstone, it says Ruth
Yeah.
O'Connor Fisher. So I always thought that was interesting. I follow the show on social media. There's still quite a little bit of a, I guess you'd call it a cult at this point, but still a lot of followers, and the show keeps getting replayed on so many cable stations,
Yeah.
and then it keeps activating discussions,
I
chat
just
rooms and stuff.
rewatched it. My
Yeah.
husband had never seen it, so I made him sit down.
Oh, yeah, I rewatched it to a point, and then the interior of the house
Hmm.
it was very, very similar, just coincidentally, to the interior of our house.
Hmm.
So when I first started watching it in 2002, three, I thought, wow, look at this set. I mean, they filmed it in that house in Los Angeles,
Yeah.
but that's very similar to with the big pocket doors and the wooden
Yeah.
stairways leading upstairs.
Oh,
So similar. Each of the upstairs, the apartments had their own settings, just like ours did. But yeah, and I, every once in a while, I've made a couple attempts to try to find Alan Ball, the writer, director, and get in contact with him to see if I can
yeah.
get in his orbit. Haven't been able to do that yet. But I do have I have an affinity for the show, and
Oh, good.
yeah, yeah, I
Good.
do.
Yeah, I feel like when your life is something that has been made into a show, not necessarily about you particularly, like there's always that edge of like, oh, they screwed it all up. This is nothing like my life, and you're embarrassed. But I love that you embrace it, and
Well, yeah, and you mentioned you being a theater kid, me too.
yeah,
Sometimes I think, oh, if only I could make this book into a musical. Or something like that, or I find somebody to help me put it into
oh
a
my
musical
God,
since,
that
and
would be
that would be, but that's sort of how do I do that? And how do I find Alan Ball?
that. I
And
mean,
see
that
what
would be
he
so
can,
cool.
yeah, so that's a good point of conversation. And yeah, other
Yeah,
people have talked about that. And when people that I know from my past,
yeah.
they'll call me, hey, I was watching this. This is so much like your house. This is so much some of the
I
stories you
bet.
told us. Yeah,
Bet.
yeah.
Oh, such
So
a great show too.
yeah, yeah. Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah,
Really,
yeah.
really good. Of all the shows I've watched, like the series ending of that was like perfection. It couldn't
Well,
be.
yeah, and I capitalized on that in the book
Oh, okay.
because in the book, by the time I wrote the book, there were 10 of us in the house. But by the time I wrote the book, and they're discussed in the book. I mean, each character is discussed. But by the time I wrote the book, seven of them had died.
Oh, wow.
So I opened this section by saying I viewed all the episodes of the series 6 Feet Under written by Alan Ball. And then I go on to say set in a funeral home and family apartment of similar interior design, I connected with the family portrayed. Each episode focused on the story of a client, how they died and their arrangements, their wake and funeral. The story was interlaced with stories about the lives of the funeral home owners. The final episode was a flash forward to tell the stories of how each of the surviving family characters met their end. In similar fashion, this final part of the book highlights the end of life occurrences, wakes, and funerals of the four owners of O'Connor Funeral Home and our three cousins. Deaths do not happen in sequence. This was affirmed to me in a letter I received from my father's sister when their brother Dan passed away in July 1973. Dan's death was a shock from which it will take us a bit of time to recover. The law of averages says we should die as we were born, oldest to youngest, but he, Dan, the third born, broke the law of averages. Needless to say, the rest of us are looking at each other furtively.
Oh,
And so that's how and then I put my brothers and I are the remaining survivors of the original Division Street residents. It's a sobering and contemplative thought. We remain furtive.
oh,
And so that then I devote a chapter to each one of the
oh, that's
people
beautiful.
that had died. So similar to the way the show ended. I just it wasn't a preview. It was a postscript, but
Yeah,
just to tie the theme of the show in with the book. That's all I
I'm
did.
really looking forward to reading your book. I have not had a chance yet, and I'm going to. So I'm
You've
really,
got a copy. You've got a copy.
I don't have a copy yet.
Okay. All right.
So,
Okay.
but I am
Okay.
going to get one. So,
Okay. All right.
Kevin, this has been, I could talk to you all day, but
All
yeah,
right.
you know how these things go. So, but I have a tradition at the end of every one of my podcast episodes where I pull a card at random from the death deck and I will read the card and then it's their conversation starter questions about death and dying. So you will answer the question and then fair's fair, I will answer it as well. So I'm gonna
Okay.
pull one here from the middle at random. And okay, okay, this is very topical. I
Okay.
well, not really for you, but just for the time. Do you think a person has the right to determine when they should die if they are diagnosed with a terminal disease? Yes, as long as they are of sound mind. B, in rare situations, but I wouldn't be a part of it. Or C, no, never. I just had someone on my show who talked about medical aid in dying. That's why I said this was kind of topical.
They talked about medically induced dying. Is that what they
Mhm.
said?
Yeah, medical aid in dying. Yeah. So that's kind of what this is
Well,
referencing. Do you think people should be able
yeah,
to choose?
yeah. I think they should be able to make that decision. I mean, for myself, I have a living will,
Hmm.
so I don't want to be kept on life support. I want to go as naturally as possible,
Yeah.
and I would support that for anybody to
Hmm.
have to make that decision, and ideally they're able to have a say in it before they get to a point where they can't make a decision, and get that in writing. So, and that's part of what I believe. I believe that not only should people have a way to declare to others about how they
Hmm.
like to die.
Yeah.
I'm gonna go a little tangent here. You
Okay.
know, part of this gets into Kevorkian and stuff too.
Mm. Yeah.
Um, um, I'm not sure where I'm at about that.
Okay. That's fine.
Um, but I think if I was sick enough or ill enough,
Mhm.
I'd want to do something to help and know that I was going to be
Yeah.
terminal. I think I'd probably consider that approach,
Yeah.
or just letting myself go in a faster way.
Yeah.
I had a good friend who passed. What is this? 2 years ago, this April, he passed from cancer, and it was pretty quick. I mean, he knew six to 7 months before what was happening, and he and I were in conversation and letter writing back and forth, not only with me but with other people. And he decided that when the prognosis got tougher and tougher, he just said, I don't want anything. I want to be home. I
Yeah.
want to stay home. I don't want to be in a hospital.
Mhm.
I'm not going to take any more treatments. He did some treatments for a while, but then he just said, I'm not going to take any more treatments.
Yeah.
This is what's it going to do?
Yeah.
So, and he was able to be of, you mentioned your question of mind. He was able to be of that mind that this is what he wanted to do. And he had friends and family that helped him in that journey.
Oh,
So, and I think that's important. I think that's important. I hope my own
sure.
circumstances avail me of the same opportunity. So,
Yeah. And as for me, everybody who listens to my show already knows how I feel about that. Absolutely 100%. As long as that decision can be made, I feel like that is up to the individual, to
well,
make
that
that choice.
and as a death doula, that's part of your role, isn't it?
Yeah, and I I have witnessed enough suffering at end of life that if there's a way that we can alleviate that suffering in any way, I'm all for it. So,
Mhm.
death isn't pretty. It's not like the movies.
No, and yeah, I was I have a meditation group that meets. We've been meeting since the pandemic, but and one of our group, it's a group of five. She passed away last Friday,
Oh
and
my
so
gosh.
yesterday, and she'd included this in her journey, her cancer journey and things, and so she passed away. So yeah, last night's meditation was focused on her,
Yeah.
and remembrances of her to tie in with elements of meditation and breathing, and we always combine a little bit of artwork into our meditation.
Oh,
So so that was that, and it was a nice, and having been born, raised, bred in funeral services,
hmm.
it was it was a nice way. I was this, and she'll have other services, I'm assuming, but this was just for the five of us, to talk about her and just to have her send off. And what I'm getting to is one of the women on the Zoom, was relating as they had their conversations with other friends, and um, people saying, "Oh, this cancer was so bad," and one of the friends said, "Well, this was her time."
Yeah.
Um, when they talked about her being the first of this particular group of friends from college to die, and they said this was her time. So that made one more thing. That made me think of that animated movie Jazz. Have you ever seen that movie
No,
Jazz?
I have not.
Look it up. I think it's
Okay.
Jamie Foxx. He's the voiceover.
Okay.
And without sport, he's a musician, so that's where the jazz
Gotcha.
comes from.
Yeah.
But yeah, in the first 10 minutes, so it's not going to spoil it too much. I don't like the first 10 or 15 minutes, his character dies. But they portray the death in such a way, and it's a very sudden death.
Okay.
But they portray the death as an escalator. And
Oh, okay.
and so as he realizes what's happening in his character, he's getting on an escalator, and the escalator is going up.
Yeah.
And he's saying with it, "What's going on? What's going on?" And there's at the top of the escalator, there's just a glow, a celestial glow type thing. And then he starts to figure out what's happening. And that I won't give away the rest, but
Okay.
he starts to figure out the rest. But that whole image for me and thinking of what this person said, it was her time. And when it's your time, I'm thinking, well, maybe it's an escalator we get on. And
Yeah.
on that escalator is be people from, if we could tell at that point what people's ages were, it's all ages, it's any walk of life. There's no connection with what part of the world you come from. We're just on the same
Yeah. Oh,
stairway.
absolutely.
Stairway.
I totally agree. I love that.
So check that out. It might and sure would give a little thing for you for the work that you do too, in terms of how you relate to people and talk to people about their journey.
I'm gonna look that up. Thank you. So
Yeah.
this
Okay.
this was lovely, Kevin. Thank you
Well,
so
thank
much.
you.
I'm gonna give you just a second here. Please tell everybody where they can find you and
Sure.
the name of your book and where they can get all that.
Yeah, I'll get this, make sure after that we get off that we're up to date on for your show
Yeah.
notes. The place that contains the most information is just to go to my website, KevinO'ConnorAuthor.com.
Okay.
And then the other place, then that would connect them with some background of the book, but also stories. There's also a place on the website that they can sign up for a weekly newsletter that I
Yes.
send out.
I'm signed up. It's great. Sign up for his newsletter.
Oh, you've been getting it? Okay,
Yeah,
great.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
okay, great. It just came out today.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I really try to get that out once a week, and I'm
Yeah.
successful most weeks. So thank you for your support. So
Yeah.
that's all, those links are all there. People can go directly to Amazon. Um, to book, I always encourage people, again, the book title's Two Floors Above Grief, but I always encourage people to purchase it too at an independent bookstore if
Mhm.
they want to support, or even,
Yes.
or Barnes and Noble, wherever they go, like to buy books, go there. But it's also when you go to Amazon or other sources, they can get the book in the Kindle form or the Audible form. So depending on your listening style.
Yeah.
And then the other part that I do quite a bit is I have a spot on Instagram called The Grief Navigator. And so since the book was published, I have just been doing a lot more. And you likely know from your work too, there are so many resources about grief. Um, can be overwhelming sometimes
Mhm.
compared to the 1930s and 40s and
Oh
50s
yeah. Oh yeah.
when my dad started. Grief. I'd have to go back and resurrect him if I ever could. Say, what'd you say about grief in the 1930s?
Yeah.
I think it was just more of have the funeral, get everything centered with the family and then move on. But
Yeah.
now so many, and again, you know this from your work, so many funeral establishments now, funeral home establishments, that's part of their work, that provide the counseling, to provide the aftercare,
Yeah.
to, and that certainly that wasn't happening even in in the time that I knew about our business. It
Yeah.
just wasn't something that was on the radar. Not to say that my dad and uncle didn't call back or visit with people as needed, but now I visit funeral homes where there's an office there, or there's a
Yeah.
website, or there's a grief counselor on site for as long as you need that grief counselor.
Yeah.
So at the Grief Navigator on Instagram, I try to I'm pretty good at putting something out every day. Either a post, or something I make myself, or tied in with another thing that's on Instagram or Facebook, so that people can connect with those resources. So that's another
Oh,
thing that I do.
awesome. I love
So
that.
check that out. Are you on Instagram yourself?
I am, yes. I don't
Okay,
use it much anymore, but I am on Instagram.
when we get off, well, go ahead. What's your handle on Instagram so you can tell
It's
your
it's
listeners?
it's Nikki the Death Doula. My listeners know.
Okay, Nikki the Death, so as you
Nikki the
get
Death
Nikki the
Doula.
Death Doula. So I'll, if I'm not already connected with you, I'll do that when I get off this call.
Thank you.
Nikki, you can follow me there.
Sounds great.
And that's what I'm doing. So
Awesome.
yeah, I welcome the opportunity for people to connect with me and other resources that I provide there.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Kevin. This has been wonderful.
Well, I appreciate your time, and I appreciate giving me the opportunity to be on your podcast.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Okay, another huge thank you and shout out to Kevin O'Connor for sitting down and having this lovely conversation with me. Again, check out the show notes. You can find everything you can possibly need to know on where to find Kevin. You can find information on where you can find me as well. So don't forget, I have a Substack now. Please come follow me over there. You can find me on Patreon. I'm Nikki the Death Doula there and pretty much everywhere. So please feel free to go check that out. Thank you so much for tuning in. And remember, as always, your grief is yours, your feelings are valid, and grief doesn't always have to suck. Good Grief with Nikki the Death Doula is produced by Nikki Smith of Nikki the Death Doula LLC in Columbus, Ohio. Nikki the Death Doula LLC is for consulting, education, emotional support, and guidance, and is no way considered a funeral establishment or licensed mental health establishment. Scripts, editing, sound design, literally everything with this podcast is done solely by Nikki Smith of Nikki the Death Doula LLC, with the exception of the music. The music is Cheery Monday by Kevin MacLeod. Licensing information can be found at filmmusic.io.